Hello, everyone. My name is Joel Johnston, and I am the Executive Director of Let Me Learn, and we are a nonprofit organization. Yes, thank you, Cassandra. We are a nonprofit organization that has been around for 26 years. And so, and in that time, we have worked on only one thing. Our little hedgehog has been teaching people to understand how they learn and how to use their learning processes with intention. And we have done this with almost, if not exceeding, 800,000 individuals, ages from kindergarten through graduate school and beyond. So we've worked with not just a sheer number, but a very large range of age groups and professions. So today we're going to talk about connecting innovatively in a digitally distant world through personalized learning. So I want to make sure, I'm just going to see how does one do that? Yes, if you don't mind just muting your microphone. During my presentation, if you have any questions, you can either put it in the chat or you can unmute your mic and just ask me. But for the time being, if you don't mind muting your microphone on your own, that'll save me a little time from having to spend it trying to find you and mute you myself. Okay, so let's get going here. So today, you can expect to understand what personalized learning is. You can also expect to identify and quantify your learning behaviors, as well as using your self-awareness as an instructor learner, and I use that intentionally, that term, to connect with your students, and then to experience that intervention firsthand. And as I'm going through this, if at any time, like I said, if you have any questions, by all means, go ahead and unmute your microphone and ask, and or you can put it in the chat. And also, if you'd like to have a PDF of this presentation, just at the end of our session here, just put your email in the chat so that I have that. All right, sorry, moving right along. So how do we at Let Me Learn, how do we define personalized learning? Well, I'm glad you asked. So personalization in learning occurs when the students use their self-awareness of their learning processes to decode a task or an assignment or a problem, and then to use strategies that guide them in responding appropriately to what's required. And sometimes your phone decides to ring in the middle of all of this. Sorry about that. Dealing with interruptions. So personalization in learning also occurs when students take responsibility for making learning work for themselves. But this is not a student-only responsibility. Instructors, and together with students, can stay connected through one-on-one communication, interaction, and reflection. And teachers coach students, encouraging them to use their individual learning processes, to help meet that specific learning objective. And in order to achieve this level of communication, we really do need to know, how do each of us learn? It is important for you to understand how your students learn, but it is also important for them to understand how you learn. So for 26 years, we have helped instructors and tutors and coaches connect to their students by solving that basic question: how do we learn? So everyone has a brain. Your brain is an organ. So it's something that you can put your hands on. I wouldn't recommend it, but has a physical presence. And your brain, since it is an organ, needs to be hydrated and fed and rested. But the function of your brain is to receive information called stimuli through your 5 senses. This is the only way information gets in. And it processes that stimuli and sends it to your mind through 4 filters. We call these filters learning patterns, and they're named after the work that they do. So sequence brings order to your life, and precision brings information to your life. And technical reasoning brings problem solving to your life, and confluence brings change and new chances, say it with me now, to your life. But your mind, on the other hand, is not an organ. It is, in fact, made up of your human consciousness. And it has no physical presence. But your mind does very important work because it makes it possible for you to think and to take action and to develop feelings about what you are experiencing. So if we were to take any one of those 4 patterns and splice it, this is what you would see. Okay, this is what you would see. Good Lord. This is what we call the crankshaft of motivation within each learning pattern. So you have thoughts and actions and feelings in each pattern. And so you have informed effort is what you have when your thoughts and your actions work together, when you act on those thoughts. And when you have feelings about your actions, you now have an engaged effort. And when you are thinking about your feelings, you have a reflective effort. And when you have all 3 voices and all 4 patterns together, you have metacognitive chatter. You have 12 voices that are now talking and competing with each other, or they can. And some voices are louder than others, depending on how you use your patterns. So metacognition is exactly this. It's not thinking about thinking. It is about the discussion among your patterns, within your patterns. And your will to learn comes from when you are able to synthesize all 3 efforts in all 4 patterns. Now, I've said your brain does important work, but your mind does too, because it changes that stimuli into things that you can recognize, whether they're symbols, numbers, words, notes, and it stores this information and data into your working memory, which then equips you to make decisions and to complete tasks and to live successfully. And your mind and you work best when you use your patterns with intention. So when you understand how your learning patterns work, you can understand directions and you can absorb information and you can solve problems and you can decide what new challenges and risks to take. So, identifying and quantifying your learning behaviors. So, how you connect to your learning starts with the personal learning coach. So I'm inviting all of you to go to personallearningcoach.com. This web-based app was developed after 20 years of work in the classroom. We set out to put that metacognitive process into the hands of the end user. So if you go to personallearningcoach.com and you click on sign up, and as I keep moving through these, you may find I will have put, yep, I'll do it again, the link to so I've just put it in the chat, sorry. Actually, I think I just sent it to everyone in the waiting room, which helps absolutely no one. Let's try that. There we go, to everyone. There's the link. So when you sign up, you will be asked to subscribe. You will see that you are providing your first name, last name, password, blah, blah, blah. You're also asked about your age group. Now, the reason why is because the inventory you will be taking actually, there are 3 versions and a 4th version. So the 3 versions are based on your age, because again, we work with individuals as young as 5 years old and as old as 105 years old. Okay, I don't really know who the oldest, how old the oldest person was who has taken this, but when you sign up, and then you will be prompted for your subscription. So I know everyone here is an individual, and you may even be a student, but for all intents and purposes of this demonstration, I'd like you to select that you are with an institution, and you will use the code CCAE 21. It's all lowercase, that is case sensitive. So I'd like you to go there. And again, this should be in the chat. I'll make sure that it is front and center for you as best I can. Yes, there we go. So in case you've just joined. And I want to say just a few things here, because once you go through, say that you're with an institution, you'll be prompted then to take the LCI. Now, the LCI is the Learning Connections Inventory. There are a few things I'd like to stress about the inventory. Have I mentioned that it's an inventory? First of all, it's not a test. That's why I keep saying that it's an inventory. So you will want to, there are only 28 statements. Sorry, let me focus here. There are only 28 statements and 3 open-ended questions. This should take about 10 minutes to complete. The version that you will have, that you are taking, is actually the adult basic ed version that we were approached by Maryland's Department of Labor's Division of Adult Literacy. Wow, it's a really long title. They wanted to start bringing Let Me Learn into their ABE program. So as a part of that, they worked with us on developing a version of the Learning Connections Inventory that would be for adults who are at a 5th grade reading level. Because otherwise, having it be for elementary, if we put it at a 5th grade reading level and just said, well, we'll just have them take the elementary version, that version is really geared more toward teachers or students and their relationship with their teachers, right? So that's not really appropriate for the clientele with whom you are working. So this inventory is a internationally validated inventory that took 6 years to develop and was worked on with about 6,000 to 8,000 individuals, both in Europe and in the United States. Now, again, there are 28 statements and 3 open-ended questions. So 2 things I'd like to say about about actually taking the LCI. First of all, you can change the statements if you want to make it fit you a little bit better. So let's take, this statement is not something that you would actually see, but because again, you're using the adult basic ed version. But if the first statement was, I like to fix cars, and you don't like fixing cars, but you like fixing watches or bicycles, then you could change that to bicycles. Just change the word cars to whatever it is you like to fix. But what I'd ask is that you not change the statement so that you're changing the nature of the statement. So you wouldn't change it from I like to fix cars to I like to sell cars, or I like to paint cars, or I like to race cars. Second, as you can see, there is a Likert scale. Yours would actually, I think, says that that's never me, and that's always me, or that's me all the time, and that's sometimes me. Sometimes is, so as a Likert scale, you can decide what that means to you. And sometimes is an appropriate answer, but it's not the island of indecision. So I'd ask that you really think through the statements that you are answering, and not just put sometimes because you just, well, I'll just get through this, because you run the risk of not having a valid LCI. So I'm going to mute my mic. I will give you about 10 minutes to complete this, and we will come back and, or I will come back, you're not going anywhere. I'll come back and we will continue to discuss what this means for both you and for your students. So about half of you have completed the LCI. And if you'd like, you can continue to the personal learning profile if you'd want to get ahead of the rest of the group. And the personal learning profile, I will discuss why we use that, how we use that in about a minute or two. I want to wait just for a few more people to finish up here. Oh, so Caitlin, that's a very good question, asking about how do you know your scores. So I will actually show you the, let me just do this. All right. So when you have completed your LCI, what you should have is a message that looks like this, where it will have your scores and a very basic description of the patterns. And then we invite you to create your own personal learning profile. So if you click on that arrow, there are statements that exist based on how you use your patterns. So if you use a pattern at a use first level, that is your natural go-to. And often you'll go there even when it's not called for. The statements then reflect that. For others who might use sequence as needed, you will have a different set of statements. And for those who avoid sequence, you will also have a completely different set of statements. And so as you work, read through them and select, and you can do that for each of the patterns. And the reason why we have the personal learning profile, we used to validate the LCI by hand. Whew, don't do that anymore. But these statements have multiple purposes. First of all, it helps validate the numerical scores that you have. The scores themselves, because this is an inventory and not a test, these scores don't mean anything in terms of whether you're good at it or not, or if you're strong. I want to be very clear. Yes, I use these are my actual learning scores. So this is who I am as a learner. I am someone who uses sequence first. I am someone who uses precision first. I also avoid technical reasoning and I avoid confluence. So I am uncomfortable taking risk out of my confluence, my avoidance of confluence. And so because I avoid taking risk, that doesn't mean that I never take a risk. So I use my precision to gather more information so I can make an informed risk. And I will use my sequence to rehearse, depending what the task is, but rehearse and plot out and plan out what that risk is going to be. So I have an informed risk and I have a rehearsed risk. And those are my strategies for addressing the fact that I avoid confluence. I also, since I avoid technical reasoning, I struggle to help solve problems. I am terrible at trying to do that. I would like to be better at it, but I'm just not great. And again, I will go to the two patterns that I use at a use first level to help me resolve those issues that I have when confronted with doing problem solving and trying to help make things relevant. That is something else that not that I struggle at making things relevant, but I struggle at remembering that it is important to address that because I avoid technical reasoning, I could just as easily play with the theoretical. So, so when you have the scores, and this is how when we talk about other instruments, often those instruments are there to, they are going to prescribe to you who you are as a learner. But by your ability to select statements, you are in fact affirming who you are. You are telling the world who you are as a learner. And you are doing so in statements that are in layperson terms. So these scores don't mean a whole lot unless you have these other statements that go with it or with them, so that people understand, oh, okay, this is who you are. And we also use this then in terms of looking for employment. Talking about yourself as a learner when you're looking for a job, when you're interviewing for a job, really opens up an opportunity for that potential employer to learn more about you, and quite frankly, gives you a chance to shine, to really express your own self-awareness to your potential employer. So, yes, any questions so far? No, okay. Then I will move right along. I will also say this, if for some reason you do not have, you got an error message in your LCI, it could be for one of two reasons. One, you'll just hit the back arrow. Don't retake the LCI because it'll clear the whole thing. You may not have answered all of the statements, or you might not have answered the 3 open-ended questions, because those are important too. The other is that you may have put sometimes too frequently, or you may have taken one answer and taken that and just answered it too frequently. So again, but I do want to move on with the rest of the presentation. Okay, and so using your self-awareness as an instructor learner to connect to students. So the number one reasons that students struggle to succeed is because they do not connect or learn in the same manner as their instructor or their tutor or their coach, which can result in misunderstanding, miscommunication, frustration, and leads to student shutdown. It could also lead to instructor shutdown, but we're not going to talk about that today. But put another way, it's not that just they're learning, but their learning pattern combination does not connect to those of their instructor, tutor, or coach, resulting in these negative experiences. So let's take a look at Alvin Community College. So here's an example. Alvin Community College is a Hispanic serving institution southeast of Houston, and they have a math success center. They had a 5-year grant to establish this and to be working with students in improving their math skills. So when you look at the average score, and for this student body, we're talking about 70 to 80 students, right? So this is not a small N as our sample here, but it is just one instructor in this example. So you'll notice that the student body uses sequence at a use first level, and the instructor almost avoids sequence. Okay, Joel, whoop-de-doo. What does that mean in practical terms? Well, it means that the students themselves actually want structure and consistency, and the instructor himself will struggle to provide that, or even to stay on course. A syllabus, what's a syllabus for? Well, certainly not following, right? Well, that's wrong. Syllabus is rather important. Students also want examples before trying something new. And in this instance, the instructor actually does not he is very reluctant to give examples because he thinks they are going to become too dependent on them. And I explained to him, as someone who uses sequence first, hey, I use examples as a way of practicing. It gives me confidence knowing that I am doing this in the right way and will have results that you are looking for. And eventually I'll have to stop using the examples and just know this on my own. And that's how I would use it. When we look at precision, the student body is a high end of as needed, but the instructor is very much uses precision at a use first level. So he can end up overwhelming them with the amount of information and steps and so on and so forth. these students are going to need to know what the important pieces of information are. And they can do it. They can do the memorization. They can do the calculations. But with a precision at that level, it would be helpful to them if they knew what some of the key pieces were going to be. When we look at technical reasoning, again, they use this as needed, and that's a high end for them. And the instructor uses it first. So they are actually going to be both comfortable and can relate to having activities that actually mean something, have real purpose. And then when we look at confluence, the students themselves use it as needed, the instructor uses it first. And so the instructor will want to just jump into the new content because that's exciting to him. Even if he's seen it over and over again, it's still going to be exciting to him to do something new. But the students are going to want an example. That would be helpful to them to help kind of ease their way into that content. But again, so I want to be clear, you use all of your patterns. You don't choose just one, because again, your patterns talk to each other. And your patterns are an explanation, they're not an excuse. So even if you avoid taking a risk, life does not treat you kindly, and you will eventually have to take a risk. So rather than shutting down, you have an opportunity to have some real strategies on how to make life work for you. So what difference does this make? What difference does student insight into their learning patterns make? So for Cassandra Sereno, she has found that the greatest impact comes from with her work with community college, low-income and first-generation foster care students who struggle in school. They really don't understand why. And then if we look at, so this is Dr. Beatty out of Maryland, and she had talked about this, introducing this to her students at the South Baltimore Learning Center. What a great night. She was very excited about the reactions of the participants, and some of them, well, probably all of them were actually a little reluctant, but even the one who was the most resistant really came away feeling very good about himself and having this insight about his not just ability to learn, but how his learning actually occurs. And then from Alvin, Mohammed Mazafari works in the local prison. And so he and I had been prior to COVID working with a math group of his in the prison. And this is what he had to say about introducing this self-awareness to his students. And that they really, before it used to be just, I'm just here to learn math, just teach me math. But when they had something else to talk about that was about them, and then also having greater understanding of each other, that created a closer bond, and it really connected him to his students, and vice versa. So having these scores, having these statements about yourself are important, but that's not where the metacognition really comes to play. This is where it comes into play. If you looked at your, if you were looking at your personal learning coach, and you would see on the menu that you would actually have tasks. So you've taken the LCI, you've built your profile, and now if you put in tasks, if you actually clicked on tasks right now, you would see that there are 5 predefined study skills. And then you also have one that's a writing default task. Now these are, we preloaded those in on purpose. But in this case, I just want to show you, this is what happens. You have an assignment that is decoded, so you can see how much of each pattern is required in the assignment. And that's good. However, where it really comes into play is after you've decoded the assignment, you now have strategies that are suggested to you based on how you use each of those patterns and how much is required in the assignment. So if you have this So depending on these strategies, depending on your use of each pattern and what is required, you have different strategies. And again, just as you have the personal learning profile, having different statements based on your use, the strategies fall in the same categories. So you have them for each of the patterns. You now have, and something that again is tailored and personalized to the way your students learn. And then they can use this not only in the immediate class that they are in, but they can use this in other modes in other classes. But I also want to show you, here's a comparison, right? So if you look at those who use sequence first, spending too much time planning out what you're going to write is a killer. You would think that perhaps because I use precision at a use first level and my sequence is also used first, that standardized tests would be really easy for me and I'd be very successful at them. But you would be mistaken, because I would end up spending too much time planning out my answers or writing too much and running out of time. Because you want as much, you want to know the answer, I know the answer. I've spent a lot of time studying it, and I'm going to give you as much information as I have. But if you use it as needed, sequence that is, you're spending a lot of time planning, you're not going to be spending a lot of time planning. That's not what's going to come natural to you. But you'll need to have some, you'll need to make some decisions about how you want to structure it. And you'll want to think about your writing assignment. And you might even think about it as like a home construction project. Same kind of thing for technical reasoning. Those who use it first, because technical reasoning is the pattern of fewest words, writing can be a challenge. And so we want to remind them that there needs to be a critical mass of words in order to get your message across. But for those who avoid technical reasoning like me, you may struggle to tell the story. So maybe thinking about it as a set of pictures in your mind, or even drawing a sketch, could actually help you with your actual writing and getting it down, getting your ideas down. So how does personalized learning help your adult literacy program? First of all, engagement and retention. I've got 10 minutes, so we're going to fly through this. We're actually in the home stretch. So engagement. So understanding how your students in your program learn gives you unique insight into them. And it allows you to connect in a much deeper way based on that insight, rather than their appearance or their experiences or circumstances. So when I've talked about this with other organizations, I want to be very clear. Your background, your gender, your ethnicity, where you grew up, your family situation, your economics, all of that would, I'm pretty sure we've shown, can affect your education. It does not, however, affect how you learn. Regardless of all that other stuff, none of that affects how you learn. None of it. I want to let that sink in for just a second. So when you understand that, the students with whom you are working, with all of their struggles, understanding themselves as learners is not going to be one of them. And their ability to learn is not going to be one of them based on those experiences. When you think about retention and retaining your students, understanding themselves as learners really means that your students can better connect to both the academic work in your program, but also any programmatic supports that you have developed, intending them to connect to that educational experience. So where has Let Me Learn made a difference? We are used in 42 community colleges, universities, and TRIO programs on 4 different continents. We've been used by 80 K-12 schools. As I mentioned before about Maryland, we also have our own charter school in rural southern New Jersey. And we've also worked with workforce development programs, both at the state and county level. We have also been used, 20 years ago, we had a grant with the European Union to work with immigrants. There is a new grant that our new program we are working with the European Union on, with the exact same immigrant population, and helping them acculturate to their new society. But we've also worked with corporations. So again, because learning is a lifelong thing, it can be applied in many, many, many different ways. So this is my contact information.